Good morning, Expo City. We are now, 7 or 8 days into what's been the most extraordinary COP ever for what I think almost everybody on this stage is willing to admit is their favorite clean energy source. Many clean energy sources work together. We help make that conversation of working together include our favorite clean energy source, nuclear power. You are currently sitting in the Net Zero Nuclear Green Zone Pavilion here in the Energy Transition Hub. For those of you who have not been to COP before, the fact that we have a Net Zero Nuclear Pavilion here of this beauty and this generous size, yet a giant Korea hydro and nuclear power booth towers over us like a looming nuclear power plant. This is something that has never occurred. This is extraordinary. Several days ago, the presidency of COP hosted the first ever official Blue Zone event celebrating the role of nuclear energy and declaring it as essential for meeting net zero goals. This is, again, absolutely unprecedented. There's a lot of cynicism out there about everything. Pick a topic, there's cynicism. There's cynicism about COP as a waste of time. There's cynicism about advocacy as any kind of thing that can make a difference. I am incredibly proud to bring to you today a panel filled with people who have made small gestures, sometimes a lot of them, and occasionally some large gestures, and have fundamentally altered the way our world is going to end up in sometimes already now, sometimes 5 and 10 years, and we're seeing those results unfold. We also have something very interesting where we have, for those of you who don't know, Katie Huff is at the Department of Energy of the United States of America and is the Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. And that is one of the most important functions in one of the biggest governments with the biggest nuclear fleet to direct how we can sustain that safely and build it into the future. And yet, she's here with us on a panel for youth advocacy. And it's not at all inappropriate, as you'll see. I'm going to quickly introduce 3 other guests, and then we will dive straight into what I think will be a vigorous and useful conversation, especially for those of you who want to make a difference sooner rather than later. Starting from the end, my dear friend and colleague, Eric Meyer, one of the OG nuclear advocates. That's original gangster for those of you watching the youth advocacy panel instead of on the youth advocacy stage. So Eric Meyer is the founder and director of Generation Atomic, again, one of the OG nuclear advocacy organizations that has made we'll talk about the differences made. I'm not going to say it. We'll show it. Then next to us, we have Sophie Francis Smith of Washington, D.C., who is also from one of the nuclear heartlands of the world, Knoxville, Tennessee, and will be talking to us about youth advocacy and policy. And we also have my dear friend, colleague, and boss in most ways, Ortiz-Wines, who is the director of Stand Up for Nuclear, one of the leading global advocacy efforts in nuclear. So, pretty high-powered panel. I know a bunch of their stories. It's my job to force them to say it with as little humility as possible so you can get the proper message. If they're too humble, just an open threat, I will tell your story instead of you, so you better brag all the way so I don't have to do it, right? That is a direct and open threat. I think we're going to start with you, Katie.
Okie dokie.
So, you're older or younger for your position in the government?
I'm not the youth, but I am younger for an assistant secretary. Generally speaking, it's a very senior position. I started as the PDAS when I was 35. I'm now 37.
So for those of you who have been to youth events, there's a lot of programs here at COP where 35 is defined as the cutoff for youth, meaning Katie was put up for an extremely important, a vital government position, was appointed quite rapidly at the age that is the cutoff for coming to COP youth events. This is extraordinary because in nuclear plant terms, she's not even to her first relicensing period, but also because nuclear energy has a major age problem. Katie, could you explain?
Yeah, so, because of this sort of ebbs and flows of the, nuclear build-outs that we've done, in the United States, there's actually a bimodal distribution.
Bimodal?
Bimodal is sort of two modes, right? It's sort of a graph shaped like an M, where there's two hills and a valley. And this distribution of ages in the graduation ages of the people getting degrees in the United States, there were lots when nuclear first started, and then there was quite a dip. And just on the leading edge of the next hill is people like me, and everyone sort of 35 and under is on that next hill where there's a lot of young folks, and there's quite a lot of folks, 55 and older. There's really no one kind of in between. And so I'm in that old part of the young group. And I think critically what this really means, getting right down to it, is that those folks in the first part of the distribution of the nuclear field are retiring right now, actively. And they're leaving behind really big jobs, senior level positions, and folks, 35 and younger are being asked to step up and just skip a lot of that intermediate part of a career. And that very much happened to me, so it's certainly the lens I see on the world, but I'm also seeing it across this really powerful group of youths where they're taking on really public-facing, strong positions in our field.
So, question for you, Katie. In my experience, there's a different view of what it means to be an advocate among those two groups. And especially I find there's a different view of what it means to be an advocate and whether it should even occur, whether it's professional, whether it's appropriate, whether it's not even lobbying to have a title in a nuclear industry and say you like nuclear among that middle section. Could you tell me, have you ever, I happen to know that Katie has assisted behind the scenes before she was in government with some fairly crucial advocacy efforts. We were in Illinois not too long ago when we were about to lose a major portion of the entire state's energy, clean or otherwise, right there outside of Chicago, and nobody knew. And anyway, let's move aside from what Katie did, because I don't want to put her on the stand that way. Just to say, have you experienced these different attitudes in what's professional or appropriate to say how much you like nuclear?
Sure, yeah. I think there are some people who take the approach that you have to stay completely objective and neutral in order to be a technical authority. I think it is entirely reasonable to be technically objective and positive and still remain a technical authority. One's integrity is not lost when one forms an opinion based on facts and then shares that opinion. I do think if you're a nuclear regulator, right, then you should stay pretty neutral, right? But in positions like mine and across our field, I think it's entirely reasonable to take everything you know technically about all the things that are great or bad about a particular technology like nuclear and decide on your own what you're going to push for your goals for the planet. And I think it's entirely professional to do so because people are looking to technical leadership and other kinds of leadership for those strongly informed opinions. And I think it's your responsibility. If you do have an opinion, you feel that you really have the information to back it up, you should really share it with the world.
I like that. And I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to put out a hypothesis. And if you don't like it, just push me off the stool and you can be the moderator. It's my hypothesis that maybe in some of this missing middle, some of the really bad pushback that I've heard others receive for being advocates while still being professionals comes from a sort of misplaced fear of the public itself, fear of the public's wrath, and that if somebody speaks up in the wrong way, they might be punished because they're above you still. Do you find that fear plays a role in pushback against being an advocate and an honest scientific professional?
I imagine that could be the case. I think having a large group of peers and counterparts around you does make you feel a little safer. And perhaps being alone in the face of questions around nuclear might be a little scary. So that missing middle might have had less confidence in standing up for themselves because they didn't have this big group that you all will have in the youth these days. But it's hard to know what drives people.
So you're saying that bimodal distribution, that camel humper people, a lot of experienced veteran people, not many in the middle, a lot of youth, that we're benefiting if we're trying to be empathic against people who say, don't talk up about the thing you love, just use numbers. Then it's this fear of being alone, and that we have the benefit of a massive group. I mean, I'm looking at some of the people in the audience who I recognize who are part of, I mean, honestly, the Katie's crew, the peers coming up under your leadership as one of the highest ranked nuclear officials in the world. I was looking if Cosmin Gita was around, but he's in charge of the Romanian nuclear program and is very young for his excellent position.
Yeah, he's
But well, we're all Team Katie here, and thank you so much. I'm going to move to Eric for the moment. Eric, you got into nuclear advocacy because you were a professional engineer, I believe, right?
You know that's not true, Mark. No, I got into it because a friend of mine sent me a YouTube video about advanced reactors, and it sent me down a rabbit hole. And when a few years later I lost my car in a 500-year flood, I knew what the solution to this climate catastrophe had to be, and I knew how few people were actually talking about it, because I joined environmental clubs in college, and that wasn't the conversation. It was conserve. It was build a few some wind and solar here and there, and so it really for me enforced the role of individuals to create the change they want to see around the world.
And Eric, you said you saw a YouTube video and then lost your car in a massive flood.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
You were a professional YouTube video watcher, or did you have another career that you were working on?
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I was, at the time I was studying music, and I kept getting larger and larger roles in operas, and then for some reason people decided to pay me to do that,
He's
something
an opera
that I
star.
love.
He's an opera star, yes.
I got to fly around, and my biggest role was Escamillo and Carmen, the Toreador, and it was a lot of fun. But I had a realization at one point that there's probably enough opera singers in the world. Like they're not gonna miss me per se if I don't do that with my life. But there aren't enough people advocating for nuclear, this like cornerstone decarbonization technology that's proven, that uses so little land, so little raw materials. So when I came to that realization, I knew I had to make a decision. And
You were how old then?
24, 5-ish.
And there were a ton of other 24, 25-year-old, say, art or even performance-trained people that loved nuclear and wanted to talk or sing about it?
Not yet. Maybe we got to work on the opera singing community a little bit.
So you were very early. So I'm going to add you. So we've got some actual pioneers here. We don't have the word pioneer in the title of this, but now we've got the Team Katie and Team Eric and all the people coming up behind, these scientists willing to be an advocate and now appointed to an elite, very high-tier government position because of this marriage of competence and belief in the energy source. And now we have an opera singer. Eric's being humble. My wife's an opera singer. There's an extremely intense shortage of specifically who Eric is and what he does in opera. So him leaving opera was not, music is hard, it's hard to make a living. It is not. That wasn't Eric's story. He found something so important where there was such a gap in people who had I don't know if I can say this, shamelessness of a performer who can walk out naked, with a costume, but naked otherwise in terms of support, onto a stage and hold an entire finicky, particular, wealthy, paying audience in rapture by himself. And he had that going for him, not the nuclear education degree, or he went with that and said, these 500-year floods are something that my abilities can change. And I know you wouldn't say this, so otherwise I'm taking liberties as a panel moderator. You need to understand that Eric's role has been fundamental to the COP event you see. Look, a big Korea hydro and nuclear power booth, right? That might be because they're a big nuclear company that wants to sell nuclear power. Their existence in this setting at COP isn't because they should be here because they're one of the biggest producers of clean power. It's because of opera singer named Eric that started at exactly the right time. Oh, wait, Eric, you're scoffing a little. What year did you first come to COP?
My first year, it was 2015 with the Paris talks.
All right. Do you know what the first year that I've seen Korea hydro and nuclear power at COP? It was not 2015.
No.
I just want to say there's an order of operation. They make an outstanding reactor that will be good for clean energy in the world, as do most of the people who show up on this stand. This opera singer was here singing opera at COP before the rest of the industry either wanted access or found access, and we just have to sit with that for a moment.
I'll say that correlation does not equal causation necessarily, but in 2016 in Marrakesh, just a brief anecdote. I remember in the Korean Pavilion they were having a side event, and the name of the side event was "One Less Nuclear Plant: Korea's Plan to Phase Out." Yeah,
and this is a state-owned company, so if Korea's official event was getting rid of our only real source of low-carbon energy at COP about low carbon, yeah. We needed an opera singer.
At that same one as well, I went to the French Pavilion, and I was like looking around. They had a high profile display of this new satellite that could measure methane from space, which that's cool. But I asked a few people, "Hey, does anyone here, do you have anything about nuclear? I don't see any displays." And they're like, "Oh," I'm like, "Well, does anybody know anything about the French nuclear fleet, which makes almost three quarters of your power carbon free?" And they talk to each other in French for a little bit, and they're like, "Oh yeah, there's one guy who does, but he's on lunch right now, so we can come back later."
It might be that clean energy and electricity just didn't have anything to do with climate change.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Maybe that's it. Okay, so I don't want to sit here and just complain about the bad old days, but we're not that old. This isn't that long ago. This is a youth advocacy panel. You have to understand that what you're seeing is an extraordinary change that, 20% of the world's clean energy, 25% of the world's clean energy was coming from a source that was not represented at the climate change conference that was supposed to get to all clean energy. And it was not the companies or even really the scientists as scientists that changed it. It was the scientists as advocates, the opera singers as science advocates. And we're going to move on, but if you could very quietly, without disturbing anyone or showing up in the sound video, just do a little bit of internal warm-up, just in case.
Okay.
Just in case, because you never know where there will be an audience showing up.
Very good.
All right. Sophie.
Sarah.
Sarah, my apologies. This is my 8th panel, I think. Sarah, tell us a little something about yourself. I want to know how you ended up in nuclear in a place where it's not unknown. People know about nuclear. It's famous for nuclear, meaning it's not like some exotic thing like these folks who discovered it and then went crazy for it.
Sure. So I'm from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, but my entree to nuclear was actually, miles away in the country of Jordan.
If I may just say, Oak Ridge, Tennessee is one of the largest, oldest, and most famous and outstanding nuclear laboratories on planet Earth, and she's from that town.
And somehow I grew up there my whole life without hearing about nuclear at all. And so I traveled to Jordan. I'm studying, I have a policy background, not an engineering one, and I'm studying water resource rights in Jordan. And it comes up on my radar that using nuclear energy for desalination is a really great application of nuclear energy.
So when that happened, when you heard this, so far from home, you heard this, did it make you re-examine your life? Not as in your choices, but home, Oak Ridge. Did you look at Oak Ridge, look up your hometown on Wikipedia, or what was the discovery process?
Absolutely. So I finished out my time in Jordan. I did a research fellowship at the Jordan Atomic Energy Commission, studying economic feasibility models, and then I went home to Oak Ridge. And I said, what does the local context look like? And I looked at what the prospects were for SMRs in Tennessee, in my local community.
SMRs?
For small modular reactors. That was back in 2018. They were a nascent technology. Neither Jordan nor TVA or Oak Ridge had any actual prospects yet. Fast forward 5 years now, TVA has just entered into this historic partnership with Ontario Power and GE to pilot a first-of-a-kind SMR in 3 countries to share the risk across 3 countries. And
any of them in Oak Ridge?
Sorry. One of them in TVA is handling one of them outside of Oak Ridge.
So, a bunch of full circles happening here. You were born in one of the global historical hotspots for nuclear, one of the few places where nuclear is entering its 4th generation. You had to go across the entire world to hear about home. So you're now in DC. Did that lack of knowing about your home inform the way you talk about nuclear to people who have also not heard about nuclear?
Great question. I do think it galvanized it created a lens for the way that I view net zero. So I think I would have been on board with this concept of like, we need clean energy, we need a world where every community has access to safe, reliable, affordable, clean energy. I don't know that I would have specifically included nuclear in that. And then my experience seeing what it could do for a community in Jordan, what it could do for a community in my hometown, what it could do for local communities around the US and around the world, that really did change the lens and ultimately informed, that was my undergrad, it ultimately informed the graduate degree that I got as well, which is a science and technology policy degree.
So what do you do in your life where you, this is practical part. Could you tell us a little bit about how you decide how far is advocacy, how far is activism, and where you define the professional and personal line?
So I think a really great answer to this is that I think youth nuclear advocates should see themselves as part of the solution when it comes to policy making and policy implementation. So one thing that I think is really important is for youth to understand the federal and state and local ecosystem of policy tools that are available to them. So for example, in the US, we know that the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law have galvanized historic amounts of finance and funding for clean energy writ large, but nuclear power is included in that. And so I think, for example, nuclear advocates understanding what that means on a federal level and then being able to implement that on a local level to speak to their local state level decision makers.
That is an excellent point, Sarah. So I like to think that I'm fairly informed in nuclear energy. I'm doing it 364 and a half days in the year. I take a half day off for New Year's. I'm pretty obsessed with policy. I'm trying to figure out how to stop nuclear closures, get it built. I come to COP. I have incredible people that I can ask for information like all of you. And it was only a few weeks ago that I learned what the Inflation Reduction Act truly had in it for building the technology that I come and shout about on stage at COP. I think you've said something incredibly important. So you were naming policies and acts, and it sounded a little bit like, you know, the policy speeches we're going to hear. But you've said we have, in part thanks to high government officials strongly advocating for nuclear, the richest pot of money going towards nuclear as clean energy that America has ever seen. And I like to think I'm informed. And what you're saying is, if you're truly wanting to be an advocate, you're truly wanting to have a role, the lack of information even about your home or even about something that's very important to you can be vast, accidental. Maybe you should know, but you don't. You're saying that a youth advocate can be a central part of the process as nothing more than explaining policy that's already there to get done what you want.
Yes, exactly. If I can add to that very practically for an applied example, if you understand the tax credits within the Inflation Reduction Act, if you say, there's $6 billion to keep reactors at risk of closing, if we say there's $6 billion of that in the Inflation Reduction Act, you can go to your local utility and inform them about that. They're probably aware of it, but if you push it, it's going to come up on their radar. You might not have the opportunity to meet with the Secretary of Energy, but you probably can get a meeting with the president of your local utility.
I love that. And by the way, I've seen that happen. If I had had a Sarah to tell me that years before, I think we would have been even better, even faster, may have saved even more reactors. That was an outstanding contribution, and I know we'll have questions afterwards. If we move on to Paris. Paris-Wines, you set out after college to be a nuclear energy crusader, right?
Yes, that was my childhood dream.
Could you tell us a little bit about what university you went to, what the culture there was about nuclear, and what you thought about it coming out?
Yeah, so I'm from California. I grew up in a beautiful small beach town, and I was like, let's go to a university in another small beautiful beach town of the University of Santa Cruz. And the best way to describe it is like it's nature camp for adults. It's in a beautiful redwood forest. The bridges you're walking between these beautiful trees as I'm like huffing and puffing to go to class. So I wanted to change the world. I was concerned about climate change. And I said, environmental sciences is going to be my way forward. And when I go there, I become vegan. I join the environmental science community and club. I was the clean building intern. And I was like, energy and the engineers and the tech people at my university don't understand. We need to redeem ourselves and go back to nature, and we cannot fix this with a technological solution. How dare you? And when I moved to the Bay Area, I was like, okay, I'm going to, of course, work for an environmental nonprofit. Sierra Club, NRDC was a big option for me. And I guess fortunately, I stumbled upon this nonprofit called Environmental Progress. And it said nature and prosperity for all. Very broad, and I was like, oh, that's my mission. That looks real good. I'm gonna be cool. And I apply, and the founder, and that's where I met Mark Nelson. The founder was an environmentalist. He worked on the first initial Green Deal, I guess, for Obama. And basically, as if I wanted to get hired, I needed to watch this TED Talk, and I was like, why I changed my mind about nuclear. And background, I'm a millennial, and I have no concept of nuclear energy. I said, maybe there's bombs. I think that's it. And I watched the TED Talk, and I was like, yeah, that seems real good. That's my hope. I'm ready to go on this crusade, and how dare my professors at my university did not talk to me about nuclear energy or energy in general. They should have mandated it.
So in other words, you got an environmental science degree. The environment is impacted by humans. You studied some of the impacts, but not the energy. And then they added on top of that by the time you got there, oh yeah, there's this carbon thing. It's part of the environment. It's an environmental problem. But they never learned about the energy. And they educated you, gave you it's a very good university, very high ranking, very prestigious. And they gave you a degree in environmental, without even telling you how energy is made in your own state.
Yes, and I didn't know we had a nuclear plant in my state that was an hour and a half from my hometown that powered my existence and my life, and then I had another nuclear plant down south 4 hours. I didn't even know. What a loser.
So we hear a slight preoccupation with being cool. Are you cool now that you support nuclear energy?
I'm the coolest. You get to work with me.
All the kids, if you heard that, you want to be cool, Paris says you need to like nuclear energy. Yeah, that's peer pressure. You'll have a lot of it, but it starts today. Paris, can you tell me about what you've done now that you get that crusading spirit that was going to be there for something, like organic toothpaste or something like that to save the climate? No, this one's real. She normally says that.
No, I made my own toothpaste and my own deodorant. So yes, that was real.
Right. Do you still make your own deodorant?
No, I've switched to the good stuff that I buy in the store.
All right. So how did this crusading spirit find its expression? I want you to say a little bit, maybe even just a list of geographies where nuclear plants leading up to even only months ago were supposed to close, where you helped people fight for their own nuclear plants the way you fought for the one near your house.
Right. So how I manifested this crusade, or my energy, how I wanted to change the world, was a global initiative advocating for the protection and expansion of nuclear energy. And up until now, many of the plants were at risk of closure. So the one I'll start with to highlight, in my home state of California, we had the last nuclear plant supplied around 15% of our clean electricity, and it was scheduled to be closed in 2025. That was premature. They said, do not apply for your license application. So what we did was, none of the politicians, when you call them, said, oh, nuclear is a done deal. Nobody talks to me about nuclear. Diablo Canyon's a lost cause. But then, the orange skies happened in 2020, and people were terrified. It looked like an apocalypse had.
So large fires put smoke up, not just choking people down below, but up high altitude in multiple layers, and it looked like out of a movie. It looked like movie filters, and people woke up. When I woke up, I looked out the window, and the sky in San Francisco was brown. San Franciscans may have clouds, but they don't expect brown skies. And during this time, Diablo Canyon was still set to close. It represented the last large climate-proof, non-climate change increasing energy source in the entire state. And California has been a major influence on all COPs to date. All of them have tons of California. Sometimes California comes here as if they are president of the United States, not even the president. And yet they were going to close down their own power plant, and then the brown skies. So
right. Okay, so the brown skies happened, and then timing was on our side. We had various individuals and groups start to assemble again. We had already started the fight in 2016 initially, and then it just kind of died down. It seemed like it wasn't on our side, but because of this event, we got a beautiful team together, and for the next 2 years, we called into public hearings, and we did phone banking actions. Eric was part of that. And we basically did the work that the nuclear industry should have done for their own plant to stand up to the state government, because they said, we are going to have blackouts if you do not secure more energy, and how dare you close your nuclear plant that is 2,000 megawatts of clean power, reliable power, and it is there during these fire events when, solar's not running real great. And so our groups that assemble in these areas do the hard work, the nitty-gritty. We call our politicians. We go out and do tabling events, and we're just there talking about nuclear because nobody else is doing it. So we've done this in California, and I'm very, very, very happy to report that, Governor Newsom saw the light. What were you going to say?
No, just they won. Paris won.
We won.
The nuclear advocates at the plants won, and California is now going to stay a nuclear-powered state, and will start spreading that message to other places.
Yeah, something like that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, $1.2 billion of the Civil Nuclear Credit Program was also made available to Diablo Canyon to help with this. It would not have been probably quite so easy for Governor Newsom and whatnot if it had not been for the advocacy. But let's not pretend that there was no government support for this.
Katie, may I ask, did you have anything at all to do with the support for nuclear that you just described? Sure, yeah. And are you an advocate on the Youth Advocacy and Nuclear Policy in the United States panel?
Yes.
So wait, you're trying to tell me it wasn't just advocacy, it was advocacy, but not the one sitting in this chair, the one sitting in this chair.
Well, I just wanted to reflect on this comment about government officials doing nothing, and I. No.
I'll comment on that.
State.
Yeah.
I object to that.
You know what? There was incentives from the federal government and the Biden administration. This is one of the most pro-nuclear administrations we've seen, and there has been money being put into projects. And Newsom, there's other motivations for him keeping the plant, but that money did good things for us. So I appreciate it. And it all culminated. We had all these factors of why it worked. But we do this in Belgium, we do it in Germany, we do it around the world, even when there's no nuclear plants. We're there talking about it. And if you have the pleasure of meeting some of our delegates here, we have 50 delegates from 22 different countries who are doing this hard work in other places. And it takes many forms. It's policy, or education, wide range, and then I think we're getting better at building this bridge between the federal, state, and then just normal people.
So that was a beautiful final statement. What I'm going to have is Sarah have a final statement, and then last statement will come to Katie Huff, and then we can have maybe a few moments of a different kind of statement from Eric. But the ladies get the final word. Sarah, leave us with some thoughts.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm looking forward to Eric's opera at the end. My final thought is in regards to this conversation we were just on, in terms of youth involvement and voices with state-level decision makers. So Tennessee, for example, the Tennessee governor signed an executive order advancing nuclear power earlier this year, and that order created a state advisory council for nuclear power. And that advisory council is staffed by industry leaders, stakeholders, government officials, Tennessee General Assembly members, but there's no youth on the council. And so I think one thing that practically would be really helpful in terms of getting community buy-in and youth voices is to put a youth engineer or a youth policymaker on councils like that. That's my last point.
I love it. And finally, Katie.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in addition to, the federal government can't do what we do without advocates sort of pushing for the kinds of things we're able to fund. I would say it's true internationally. This has been a very U.S.-focused panel. This is a very international physical space. I think there are analogies in all of your governments about where the power lies to do one or another thing. And the power in, convincing your politicians to do something, in particular, elected politicians, it lies in the constituencies, and you all are the constituency, and there's no one just slightly older than you doing the work because they're all getting ready to retire, going back to my original statement. So you have to step up and be like Paris, be like Sarah, be like Eric, be like Mark.
Be like Katie. Thank you so much, Katie. Oh, so right before you sing, that will be our benediction. No more words from me after that. I just wanted to point out something. We had something quite astonishing here between these three ladies, leaving you out because you'll get your... It's not over till the big Eric sings. But You were mentioning, rah, 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 we must crusade, this is wrong, I'm out on the streets, all these officials and all these people are doing something wrong. What you're saying is, we need to build bridges between this, and what you did is help provide, obviously, we have to say it like this, very many people did it, it was a giant team effort, getting it over the line together, but we had one of the most astonishingly effective young advocates for nuclear in the world, in my opinion, helping make sure we don't lose what you are demanding we fight for, and you're going to make sure we don't have any other slip-ups as the bridge between these worlds. I think that's astonishing. Please give me a round of applause for these four, and then I'll sing you out with Eric.
This is going to be a duet then.
Hit it.
Can I add one more point just before I break into song? One other thing youth can do. Consider running for office. I just decided to run for my city council. We need more young people in government making these decisions. You don't have to always shout from the outside. You can become the inside. So another thing to keep in mind. All right, so yeah, we'll sing a little bit. So this, I'll sing a song at first, or a part of a song that I first did at COP21 in Paris on buses and trains to very confused Parisians as I was singing in English. It goes a little something like this. Nuclear power holds the key to universal prosperity. It is nuclear energy we must embrace for the human race. And when we build it, history will show it was the right way to go. There you go.
Thank you very much.